Hello everyone, I am a chai. Today I'm going to make something called Night Rose. It has three key features. Ray Chin. Ray Chin's poetry has also received full support, and this is its cap. The cap is single layered and very easy to make. And this won't fray because it has some textile adhesive inside. This should be non-woven fabric. I can't remember what it was. Oh, it's non-woven fabric. And this is hand-stitched along the edge. If a sewing machine is used, it will curl and lift. And this is the sewn lace with two glued flowers. This is the underskirt or the skirt lining. Skirt linings are typically made with two layers. The outer layer is longer, the inner layer is shorter, and lace is attached, like this. Now, let's take a look at the material package. These are its supplies. The fabric is clearly a single layer. This mesh is used for making petticoats, and this white fabric is for the waist of the petticoat. Then this is the mesh along with the attached lace. Let's set this aside for now. This is its auxiliary material. This lace is for attaching to the hem of the skirt. And there's another one. This is for the bottom hem. It is folded back after being sewn, like this. This is the lace trim of the slip, elastic band. Then there are 4 hidden buttons since it uses them. And there's this little flower and this bead. The bead is red with red on top. And there's this small hook bead right here. And there's also this string. This cotton rope is sewn onto this. That's about it. I'm starting to take it apart. Let me explain how to make this hat. This is the hat. It has 2 seams. This part is symmetrical. This one also has 2 seams to make this type of hat. This hat consists of 3 pieces, a 3-piece design. This is the crown of the hat. This refers to its height. The edge of the hat. This is the brim. The middle part of the hat. This piece has only 2 parts because this is broken. This seam, this seam. These 2 are cut symmetrically. Draw it like this. Then to this side, you can keep it as is, because they are the same. And this is the brim. It consists of just 1 piece. Then, once it is marked out, it can then be cut. Try to mark the center line as accurately as possible. It will be easier to work on. Then this circle too, it's advisable to mark this circle. Because during sewing, this circle may sometimes fail to align. It's simply after you have finished marking. It will be easier to work with them. First, turn it inside out. Scratch the inside and mark them as the front. It looks like this. First, take this brim. First, deal with this broken seam. Put it together and sew. Turned inside out. This way there are only 2 alignment points. This seam is a PA seam. Then stitch down the center. This one is also the high point of the hat. It's the same. Sew it together like this. Then like this. Sew both sides, make it into a circle. These 2 are sewn together. Then first, let's stitch them together. What about this seam? This is how it works. It's present on both sides. This is how to connect it. This should not be aligned with it. When it is aligned, it will become very complicated then. You will understand once it's completed. I believe this will make it easier. This way, it will sew at the back and will be on both sides. If this seam is positioned here, 2 seams are sewn together. At that time, it won't feel very good. The back center is here, offset it. This is the 2 sides, and this is the back center. When wearing it, sew it back together. Let's fold it like this. Find a point. This seam aligns with the other seam. This is half the weight. Draw a dot on it. Then this dot, align it with this seam. Like this. This way, attach it, connect them together. Make a pointed end. It might be difficult to sew. Just this round part. Make a few pointed openings, 0.3 in length. Don't make the pointed openings too deep. If you make them too deep, they will leak. This is to make it easier to work with. Because as long as there is curvature, sew it, and the outer circle will shrink. But the inner circle remains the same. You can't enlarge it either. If you enlarge it, it won't work. So you need to open up this seam. Isn't it bigger this way? Just separate this material. Now let's tweak it again. It felt a little small earlier. Now you can begin sewing. Start from this point and go around. Then sew back to this point. The hat crown and brim are stitched together. It's all good, as long as you follow the earlier method. Align this point with this seam. Make sure to mark it properly before you sew. Then you can sew it together. Then turn it over. Make this circle. This circle is the same. It is stitched together with the hat crown and decoration. It also has a seam allowance. It also needs a pointed notch with a depth of 0.3. Sew a bit more. Let's sew a circle. Make sure not to cut too much. Now this one is also fine. Then sew it with this hat design. The hat design refers to this mark. Align this point with that point. Sew in this manner. Sew this on top. Just place the opened amount on top because you can pull it while supporting it. If it's too small, just pull it a bit more and it will be fine. It's correct this way here. Then sew around like this. Now we've reached this level, this stitch and this point. Must be aligned. What about this side? Align it with this side. It's just right. Just place the circle at the bottom. Place this side on top. Watch it stitch. Once sewn, it will be fine. Send it over. After it has been sent over, this seam allowance should face up. Then sew a circle by hand. Flip this seam allowance to upwards. It looks a bit more pleasing this way. This is what I just sewed. And now, even though it's secured here, this seam allowance should also be sewn around with a hand needle like this. This thread should not be too obvious because there's no lace to cover it. This seam allowance is facing downwards. They are opposite each other, like this. The effect is better when blocking downwards. You'll see when you try blocking upwards. If you block upwards, it's not very easy to block. If you block downwards, it will go smoothly. Sew a circle like this. This is something I made earlier. It's sewn using a single thread. It can use both single and double threads. It looks somewhat better when sewn. Make the stitches smaller. Don't make it too obvious because the thread is covered with lace here. There isn't any on top, so it needs to be sewn better. Then this first stitch, start from the back. These are the two sides of the hat. When worn, these are the sides. This is the back center. All the unsightly things should be hidden at the back. You can also start from the inside. The needle can be hidden inside. If you start from the outside, you need to backstitch twice. I messed up. Let's start sewing from the inside. This seam is open. No matter how you sew, I forgot to mention one thing. All of its seams are opened in this way. If it all leans to one side like this, it will be thick. This way, it can help share some of the load. Now turn it over to start sewing. Start from the center back. Sew on this seam. This needle is a bit brittle this time. This was purchased on Taobao. I can never manage to buy steel needles. Sometimes I feel dizzy in my hand. It just breaks. So you need to be a bit careful when using it. Sew to here, sew to the top. Sew to the top, sorry. Pour it like this twice, then look at the front. When pouring with the seam facing down, it will appear somewhat rounder. If it fell upside down when I was a child, it will have angles. The side with larger stitches is concealed inside. The stitches on the outside are slightly smaller. It can be arranged like this on the inside. Make the stitches a bit larger. Then this stitch on the outside is a little smaller. This way, the inside stitch will be larger. The stitches on the outside are small. Don't look at this side, it's a failure. This side is nearly invisible. This side has established a pattern. Secure it this way. This way it stitches 2 circles in a single line. After hand stitching 2 circles, this piece becomes very round. Unlike before, it had no shape. Then when it reaches this point, let's start with the lace. It is pasted, this lace. This saves some material because there is another skirt hem, so use this. This can save a little, approximately. Then use scissors, cut off the excess. Then sew this again with a hand needle. This is the seam. It should be placed at the center back here. Align this, start sewing from here, then position it here. This way it won't be seen. This is the front and this is the back. This one. You should still use a needle to sew it. You can use a glue stick to attach it, but you need to just be a little more precise with your hands. Don't use too much, as it can easily cause the glue to leak. It appears stiff. It feels stiff. I haven't used that adhesive before, but it looks doable. It's just hand sewn. After finishing sewing this lace, now let's take care of this edge. This is for edging. If you decide to do it yourself later, if you don't want to do the edging, this is simply rolled up, roll it back by 0.5, then sew it with a hand needle. What about that quantity? I will provide it. I just need to subtract 0.5. Then it can be considered as edging. If you want to do it yourself, you need to add an additional 0.5. Otherwise, this smoke effect will be brief. Just like this, I initially wanted to make this small seam like this, but later I found that using lace might be a better option. As long as you keep still, especially if you want to hem the edge, then you should add 0.5 yourself. What I'm offering you is just right. Let's place this attractive part on the outside, then place this flat side on the inside. Wrap it this way. Also, starting from the middle back here, start from the torn seam. Begin with the side that your hand follows. I go smoothly with this side. It's turned the other way. This side is the front. The nice looking side is the front. The side you don't like is the back. Use the hand needle like this, then wrap it up. It has to be done. This side is the same size. Keep wrapping until the end. You can also use a sewing machine, but this kind of thing, when you use a sewing machine, it's easy to roll the edges. That edge becomes misshapen. I find it more stable to use a hand needle. It's a bit easier to use. So regarding my hand needle, when using a hand needle, you need to backstitch, which means you wrap it around a few more times. Then you come back around. If you don't like it now, just tie a knot. But I don't like tying knots. Covering it with a hand, just wrap a few more times, then tie another knot. Don't sew everything this way, do it this way. Then you can sew backward. This way, it will. It won't be cut off. This lace is sewn this way. You begin sewing from here, then tie a secure knot from the back, trim this off, then this hat is finished. There's a small flower remaining, this way. Let's place this in the front, then put it on the doll. Check where it looks good, then just stick it there, just stick it together. Like this. Just stack it a bit, just stack it a bit. If the two are separated, it doesn't look good. This is fine. Just don't completely separate the two. Just stack it a bit, just stack it a little, like this. Let's cut out a whole outfit, cutting a skirt. Then the hem of this outfit. First, cut this large piece. Generally, when cutting, large pieces are cut first. Then cut smaller pieces. This whole piece of fabric is more than 20 inches wide, is sufficient for use. Then you find this is just folded in half, it is one half, and it has another half. So when you get this fabric, you just need to adjust it a bit more. Then cut it down like this. I have finished cutting this. If you want to work with this kind of fabric, this skirt hem. If it's not even on both sides, if one side is longer and the other is shorter, then the best effect is achieved by tearing it by hand. Measure its width. Leave the frayed edge out. Do not count the frayed edge. Strips that are too clean, because the frayed edges will be trimmed off later. Inside here, if you want to tear it by hand, leave a bit more Mistrewer. It also grows to 0.2, because it will get damaged when pulled. This part of the frayed edge, cut a small opening, then tear it off. Such a skirt hem it will definitely be standard, it will be even. There won't be any unevenness. Then take this, trim the fur on both sides. Don't cut too much, just cut this fur edge, turn it over and trim this side. It's a bit curled, it's hard to cut, adjust it by hand, it definitely needs trimming, otherwise the stitching won't be accurate. The fur edges on both sides have been trimmed. Then you fold it again. Cut off this long part. Trim. The skirt hem is done. Put it aside for now. This is cut, not finished. This is the upper garment. It's like this. Cut a piece for the front. The sleeves are two pieces. This is the front side. It has the flower on the back side. No, the left sleeve and the right sleeve. Then turn it over. Don't let them all be like this. It has been cut straight again. By the way, there's one more thing. The rose pattern on this garment should face up. It should be placed facing up. Otherwise, after finishing, it will turn upside down. That won't look good. So pay attention to this pattern. Then this cuff is to be cut right here. Cut two pieces, like this, like this. Then the back is also two pieces, front, left, and right sides. Turn it over. Once everything is drawn like this, indeed, all its markings must be done properly. The alignment points for the front and middle sleeves. Additionally, this marking as well. This point signifies that it is the front sleeve. Then when it's completed like this, you can then proceed to cut it out. All the seams are properly left in place. No need to keep it yourself anymore. Then, as long as it explains what is inside. If you want to keep it in the line, how should you do it? I won't record here because if it gets too long, you might not have the patience to keep watching. Just cut along this line. So I won't record either. This is its front piece. One of the hands of the front piece, cut it off yourself. Then when you draw, you need to include it in the drawing. This part is fitted at the waist and also the sleeve hems. Just a note, don't get it mixed up. This is how it is joined. It's connected to this sleeve hem. It needs to be flipped. This inversion is wrong. The sleeves will be small then. So cut according to this fabric. This is the direction of its pattern. Then you can make a mark for the right side like this. Connect it like this. Then this phenomenon won't occur. So this is how it's connected. Make sure to mark it well. The doctor's tailoring is complete. The doctor's facial tailoring is complete. There is still the interior to do. This is the interior. The lining is connected both front and back because of this reason. If this method is used, the shoulder won't be overly thick. It will look somewhat better. This is the shoulder seam, front and back shoulder line, this line. Then you also need to mark it because when doing embroidery, yes, the inside doesn't need it. It's just habitual. This side is necessary. When aligning with the doctor, shoulder point to shoulder point. This can be left unmarked, but this needs to be included here. Then the wrist, this is where the waist is gathered. It needs to be marked. You can cut it along the outline like this. The doctor has now finished cutting everything. This is the facial part. One front piece for the facial area, 2 pieces for the back, 2 pieces for the sleeve caps. The sleeve consists of 2 pieces. Next, this is the inner section. There's a tear in the middle of the inner part. This is due to the collar. It needs to be opened up. It cannot remain attached. If it remains attached, it cannot be cut. A single piece. According to the doctor, we should stop for now. The method is to sew this rope. Fold it like this. Sew all the way to the sharpest point. Pay attention. Align it like this. Then start sewing from here, sew to here. The sharpest point. That's it. This is done. Then both follow the same method. The inside is like this as well. The inside has also been stitched. Just gather this rope. Once the inside rope is gathered, once the sleeve waist is gathered, sew the front center together. In this way. Look at the back side. Then sew a 0.5 centimeter seam. All the pieces have a 0.5 seam. Connect it from the middle, like this. Join it like this from the front center. Then handle its seam like this. Give it a shape. That means to open the seam. Because the net is too small, so this seam must be handled well. Then let's set this aside for now. Make a front piece. The front and back are stitched together. Sharp seam, armholes aligned with armholes, and necklines with necklines. Sew them together. After sewing, the sharp seam should be opened. The rain halo can be lightly ironed, like this. Once done like this, we just wait to attach the sleeves. Now we'll start this. Put it aside and we'll work on the sleeves. Because it was affected. It connects with this sleeve, like this. First, take this. It is a puff sleeve, so there are 2 lines. Gather with a spacing of 0.5. First do this. This one should be gathered first, then connect it with this. It's the same, right? This is the line I've prepared. It goes up to here. Press a line at 0.5. This way, the effect of the 2 lines will be much better. Then let's start with the bottom. Tie it with the cuff, like this. The distribution of this part is there are more in the middle section. There is less distribution on both sides. Because this sleeve is curved, so it is concentrated here. This way it will become flat. This is a standard sleeve, so there are fewer parts on both sides. There are more parts in the middle. It's roughly this shape. Then connect it with this. Take a good look, don't get it wrong. Draw one that's the same as this. It's the same length. Adjust slowly. Sew it like this. This one is sewn together. Then do it like this. That seam should face up, iron it a bit, do the same when you sew. Upside down, because this is how it will puff up. If it's facing down, then it won't have this effect. Then the cuffs need to be rolled 0.5. Press a 0.1 centimeter line. It should look like this when pressed. Then this sleeve is done. Put it aside for now. Wait a moment, it needs to be sewn together with this permanently. So let's finish the other sleeve first. Next, we will put on the sleeves. This is the sleeve. Gather it together. The thread that has just been pressed down. The gathering is the same. The measurement is concentrated at the top, at the sleeve section. Then this is its sleeve. The bottom half of the sleeve head. This part has no measurements. This is it. Starting from here, half of it, the areas below are all flat. This arc right here are all flat. Only in this part at the bottom, probably like this. This area is completely related to the drafter's part. It's all flat. Then make it look like this. Like this. Isn't it the points that were drawn earlier? Align the sleeve point with the shoulder point. Put them. Adjust the sleeve to the same length as this. Another simple method is to first fix this point. Just sew one stitch, then move this part. If it's too long, pull it back a bit. If it's too short, stretch it a bit more, because it's fixed here. So it doesn't matter how you move it. Then, if you are experienced, you can begin sewing from the center. Sew from the center to both sides. That should be sufficient. You can create a pointed shape at the sleeve area of the garment. You can do a maximum of 3, a depth of 0.3. Avoid making it too wide. In this situation, I've completed the sewing on my side. Sew from the middle seam. Sew to this end. Then, in places with such a large curvature, it's usually difficult to handle. So after making a pointed tip, it becomes easy to connect. Everything aligns perfectly. Take another shot here. This process of breaking it down. This needle, the point that was changed earlier, align with this pointed seam, then align the front sleeve section with itself. This front sleeve section is also marked. Look, this is the front. Then hasn't it gotten longer? Then secure a stitch first. A stitch like this one. Align the midpoint of the sleeve with the pointed seam. Secure it in place. Then there is one more area to adjust on the sleeve. It is located where the temperature is highest. Create 3 pointed tips. The length of the pointed tip is 0.3 units. Do not go beyond the seam, like this here. Then go adjust the sleeve again. This is not yet secured. Pull this thread from the front side. Adjust it slowly, bit by bit, like this. Once it has experience, then it can be done in one go. You won't have to go through the trouble. I did. But it's best for beginners to do it this way, to make it more precise. If the puff sleeve is done incorrectly, it will become misshapen. This is just right. Then sew a 0.5 centimeter stitch. Place the pleats underneath and sew them properly. This sleeve is sewn properly. The stitching needs to be a bit more precise. It's a 0.5 centimeter stitch. Neither too much nor too little. This way, the tip won't be wide or narrow. Otherwise, it will be asymmetrical and lack coordination. Then gather it to this point. Then proceed to work on the collar. The collar is sewn here. Then move to the next step. The style of this collar from the back center to the front. The edges of the collar are completely flat. There are simply no stitches, only the collar has stitching around it. So let's get started. Take a piece of fabric and fold it in half. Then draw its outline. Then use the sewing machine like this. Sew the edges of the collar from the back center. Sew it after sewing it up. Trim, because of this stitching, it has already been left, so just cut along the line. But this part needs to be left. Trim off, just leave 0.3 millimeters. Like this. It's easier to flip when cutting corners. After trimming, you need to turn it over. This packaging machine can also be used. This is for the spacing points. Then this corner, cut a piece. Just make it a little thinner, then press along this line. Fold it a bit, forget it. Tweezers. If you often do handicrafts, you can buy one. Such tweezers, this type of angle. Twist it a bit with these tweezers, then flip it over. If you don't have tweezers, just use your hands to stack it. Then be gentle. This way, the corner will be very sharp. Then, for something like this, if you don't have it, just stack it like this. The results are definitely this effective. Making adult clothing involves using tweezers. Like this. This is how the tweezers are made. After it's done, it's combined with this garment design. You can start by attaching the lace, but my habit is to do it after finishing first. First, use a hand needle to sew the lace. It's like this bell. Find a focal point. It can align with its focal point. Fold it in half, then draw it, like this. It aims at that point. The key focus of the outfit design. Then this pointed tip, aiming at this tip, you can sew it with a hand needle. Just fix it with a hand needle because it will eventually be attached to the bell. Fix it like this with a hand needle. Do not exceed the size of the stitches. Once this is done, place the inside part with clamp this bell in the center. It adheres to the face. Then clip on the bell. This is the back center, the middle part at the back, a circle. You can draw a 0.5 stitch. This needs to be drawn more accurately. You can take the paper, measure it with a ruler, or you can draw it when you first cut it. It's like this when you want to settle down, just like that. Then the end is simply the end. Sew the ring of bells together. You can also make this armhole first. Even if it's sewn on, it can still be completed. This might be a bit easier. First, let's handle it. Make a pointed hole around. This way it can be turned over, because we need to roll the edges. Otherwise, it won't roll properly. When you do it yourself, your heart goes with the flow of the work. When recording, the order might get a bit mixed up. After creating the pointed holes like this, you can start rolling the edges now. Roll to 0.5. After rolling, press down lightly on the rice noodles. This way, the sleeve cap is nicely rolled. Then use this to turn it over. The reverse side faces the reverse side. The front side faces the front side. Like this. Make the bell a little further away. You need to leave a line for this. Then you need to make a pointed hole. If you don't make the pointed hole, flip it over. Flipping it over won't make it flat either. You need to be careful with this. Don't cut through it. Here in the middle, the farther away places, you need to create a few more pointed holes. Then turn it over. This makes it easy to flip. Then, after the bell has been dealt with here, let's work on this side seam. Sew the side seam of the bell. Additionally, sew the side seam of the face. The fish section is stitched up like this. Then this seam needs to be opened. It's the same. If you don't use a backstitch, it's easy to come undone. Sew 2 extra stitches in reverse, then sew the side seams. This is the facial side seam, like this, below this armhole, this part under the arm. The seams are similar. You need to set it aside. Then the seams on the inside extend all the way from the bottom to the sleeve cuff. Here at the cuff, this is the front side, the side seam of the face. After it is sewn, the seam of the sleeve should be facing up. Sew it on as you go. Make sure not to point it downward. It's a little flat in this area. Can you manage to put it on? Then once it's all done, when you turn it to the front, this is how the seam looks. You need to open it. Let it stay like this. Lower the sleeves, otherwise it will have a thick, hard lump here. Turn this over, just like this. Finally, sew the lace onto the collar. Now it's like this. Manage the lower hem, adjust the lower hem. The lining and the outer layer will be joined together. The lining is 0.5 centimeters longer than the outer layer. To ensure that the seams are offset, so you don't need to worry about it, don't trim it at all. That's just how it is. The top part is finished. Now let's work on the hem. The hem is like this. It needs to have lace attached. It should be attached to the fabric piece, then attach the lace to it. First, draw the position for the lace. Just follow this, find a few marking points. Then just connect them with a ruler. This drawing should be more precise. It means to be parallel. Otherwise, it will be slanted. It's the width of this lace. You can create 2 lines along this edge, previous one and next one. It won't curl up like this. The seam at the bottom measures 0.5 centimeters. It's connected to that lace. This is a 0.5 centimeters seam. After sewing, turn it over like this. Then press down a line of 0.1 centimeters. When attaching this lace, this edge is exactly the same, leave it 2 to 3 centimeters longer, and this side also needs to be extended. Avoid letting it happen. It shrank while sewing. After this lace has been attached, do not touch this for now. Finally, trim it. Then with that border. This is the border that connects to the floor. This one is also slightly left longer. Each edge should extend 2 centimeters. Then they are stitched together. This seam measures 0.5 centimeters. This has been stitched. After it has been stitched, move this seam. After flipping it over, press down a line of 0.1 centimeters. This will hold it in place. This is how the floor is finished. Then work on the upper part. Make sure not to get this pattern wrong. Don't face down, face up. Then press 2 pleat lines. Press 2 pleat lines. Press another line every 0.5 centimeters. There is one more thing. It's just the blue one above. It particularly affects the visual effect. This wet wipe gets damp. Then rub it a few times. Press it a few times and it will come off. Sometimes it may also revert. But if you try a few more times, it should work. Then it will disappear. Press. Its surface doesn't look like this. Press the line well, then gather the pleats. Gather it to match this, to match the length of its waist here. Then stitch them together. Its edge needs to be flat. The position at 1.5 centimeters is flat. There are no creases because no need to pull it out. This is because it didn't press down here. Start from here. That's it. And what about here? The pleat here is a bit flatter, 1.5 centimeters this way. Then start working on this side. Make pleats. Leave some on both sides. When buttoning, if there are only pleats, sewing becomes difficult. You can make a knot here, tie a knot, and then make adjustments. The pleats are uniform. This way. Then draw the same length as that. It should be adjusted to be more even. Then reduce the amount of folds on both sides, like this. It's a bit long. Adjust it to the right time. You tie a slip knot here, because in the end, if it becomes too long or too short, you can adjust it. Then I'll give it another comparison. It's just a tiny bit off. No problem, you can just do it while making adjustments, but it shouldn't be too far off. Then put this slip knot. Put that pleated fabric underneath. Place the hook on top. Sew it like this. The white part of the face has been stitched together. Now, let's work on the interior. The method for the interior is the same as that for the face. Like the pleating of the face earlier, the pleating is the same as the rolled edges. This rolled edge has a roll of 0.5. That one has a few strokes of edge. Once it's done, start making the pleats. You should also leave a space of 1.5 on both sides. There should be no pleats. Begin the gathering process from this point. This one is also pleated. It's the same as the skirt of the bodice. Sew it over. The lining has also been completed. The inside is done like this, and now the skirt hem. After both sides are completed, create the back center. Sew the back center together. The part that has grown out, sometimes it will grow. If it grows, just trim it off. Don't cut it improperly. It has been cut badly. Let's just use scissors to cut it. I've done a bit too little tearing by hand. If it tears badly, it's all ruined. These two seams are misaligned. So I began to mention Minister Lee, but this is due to the lack of connection at the front and back. The interior sections are not connected, so this is an oblique thread. If you pull on it for a moment, it will become very long. This way it impacts the overall outcome. Although it is inside, but try to match the pattern as closely as possible, like this. Don't stretch the inside over time. Just sew it together smoothly and naturally. The more you pull, the longer it gets. If the inner layer expands, it can easily leak. It leaks out to the outside. Do not align the inner and outer seams. Aligning them is incorrect. It is quite thick when aligned, so it's styled this way on purpose. Make it offset, in between these two seams. Once everything is sewn, flip it over, dagger collar. This collar doesn't reach the top. If it reaches the top, that's incorrect. There's a position for the upper collar. Draw based on the position of that collar. That way there won't be any mistakes. That pattern is overly similar. This line on this pattern, it refers to the position of the collar. It is the center back line, the point where the two connect. Isn't this the second control? The two connect and form a bigger piece. So if you want to mark the collar point, just use this marker to indicate it. Then the skirt hem needs to be handled. It's just after you've started to get it right. It has flared out. I just twisted it earlier. All the skirts are like this. Don't pull here. Hold it up a bit. Make it stand upright on the ground. Otherwise, it will explode. It's also very ugly. This will twist out its pleats. Once you pull it, it will become vertical. It will achieve this effect. It looks much more pleasing to the eye. And now what's left are the lace and letter button. I'll talk about the lace first. The letter button is easy to pin. The position of the letter button. Mine looks like this. Collar a button on the back of the collar, then sew a button at the waist. Lower the back first. Sew a button like this. Next, let's pin another one, like this. Then when you're pinning, first, pin one side. You can also pin this side first. However, the two of them must be in relative positions, will be arranged alternately. Where should this be nailed? This one should be nailed where it corresponds. First, let's make a good Then I won't film the hidden button anymore, as it can be hand sewn. Let me talk about this lace. This is the small lace at the collar, like this. It is also hand sewn. Then it's this edge, just this edge, perfectly aligned with it. Just sew along this line. Don't cover it like this, the effect isn't visible, so it should look like this. Just place this edge perfectly on top, then sew a little bit to the bottom, go around and sew to this side. Then come here, this part that flows long is part of the bag, cover it underneath. Sew it over like this. Let's start sewing from the top. Then we'll wrap it back at the end. We'll wrap it up from the end, since I found this method might not work very well. So I'll just sew it over like this first, sew to this corner, and then turn. So this part is the edge part that is sewn with it. This hole here must be exposed, should not be covered by this cloth. Otherwise, the effect won't be good. This turn needs to be improved. Then sew all the way to the end. It's just when you're sewing. Because of this needle. I'm really sorry about this needle. I haven't found a good needle to use. I haven't been able to buy the right one. And then I'll try to find some as much as I can in the future, make it thinner and sturdier. Then when you sew, just don't go through. As long as it can be stitched together, because if it goes through, the lace density is very high. This needle is a bit thick. If you want to manage, it's a bit of a hassle. So you just need to choose one stitch. As long as it can be sewn together, that's fine. Then sew to the end. After this is sewn to the end, then go back to tidy this up, roll it back. Then hand sew to secure, do not pierce. Do not pierce. That's it. You just need to pick up a stitch. As long as it can be secured, that's enough. This way it will be stitched securely. Then tie a knot. I forgot. Like this, tie a good knot, then you can cut it off. Cut off the excess. Now the body of the garment is sewn. Now only the decoration is left. There is another one. First, sew the cotton strap, then sew the beads. This is cotton rope. The cotton rope is about this long. Just sew them all on. Then tie a bow. This cotton rope is sewn onto this. The distance from this collar, there should be a distance, about 0.2 down or 0.1 works as well. Attach this bow on top. You should conceal the knot on the back. Don't let the oil leak out. Then set the center point. If you can't get it right, just use a pen to mark the position. You need to place it in the center. Then, just like that, it needs to be placed in the middle, otherwise it doesn't look good. I sewed it from the front. You can also sew from the front, but you need to hide it. Then add a few more stitches. Then sew this rope again. Like this. Fix it in the center like this. Then press the other side. Do not pierce through. Do not pierce. It's double layered. Just pick up one side. If you pick too much, tie a knot like this. Then, that's all you need to do. It's best to place this on the back. Because if it's placed on the front, it can easily fall off. Then you can then tie a bow like this. Then cut it to the length you desire. Cut it off. Cut carefully. Cut carefully. First, cut off a little bit. Check if you're satisfied with it here. If you're satisfied, then just keep it this length. If you're not satisfied, keep cutting like this. This will do. Then go to that small bead. It's this small bead. Find 3 points. Distance. If it's about the bottom edge, 0.8, 0.7. Here is 1. This goes down. Move it down a little bit. Let it show. Then find another point in the center here. Fix the point like this. If you don't fix this point, this seam is off. Like this, like this. Then the other 2 beads. They use the same method. Just wrap it around twice. It's already quite stable. It's very sturdy and won't fall off because it's a double layered thread. Okay? After this seam is finished, tie a knot. This knot is tied on the outside. The front part is done. Now what's left is the hidden opening. And then this part, before it was set, run outward like this. So we need to draw a clear line, fix it back in place, like this. Press down from the top to the chin here. This way, secure it by pressing down along the line. Continue all the way to the top, then attach the button. Let me show you this button. What if there really is someone talented? It's also possible that they can't sew buttons. I suppose I should sew it a little. And then still, this way I can fasten it with a stitch. Don't tie a knot yet. Tying a knot hurts the hands. It's really uncomfortable to touch. Just like this. Reverse the needle, add 2 more stitches. Let's place the nail base here. Then place the nail holder here. This will secure it. Never mind, I still decided to use this one. It's all about your own preference because when I was touching it, over here, when I touched it, it felt flat. This is a nail. It might look better when exposed. When I do it myself, I just want to do it however I want. But when filming a video, I want to approach it differently, make it as good as possible. I sewed the first one a bit finer, the second one was left out. I will only talk about the position and not how it was stitched. Good. So this has already gone through, right? Then during the second injection, the second hole comes from this hole. This hole is the one being threaded. Then it goes back. Hold the edge. Like this. Lower this a bit. Then pass it through this hole. Come back through here. It's the same hole as that. Don't go back through this way. If you come back this way, it has removed this wire again. So it's stuck in this hole from the bottom. Then, as long as there's one stitch on top, then expand on that. This one, it just needs one stitch. It's been sewn too much. This way it won't fall off because it's baby clothes. If it's clothing for adults, you definitely need to make a few more stitches. Because of these 8 buttons, each one is like this. If you have to sew them very carefully, in the end, you might need a bit of patience with the rust. Then, come back. That is, like this. After winding a few stitches, tie a knot, then tie another knot to prevent it from falling down. Each one uses this stitching method. Thread one hole and take a stitch, then pass it through again. Just secure it, just ensure it stays put. Then indicate the position. This seam is located here. Then how do you sew it over here? You put the two of them together. How do you sew it over here as well, just facing each other? Then find something. The fixed positions are the same, otherwise it will twist. That will happen, it won't be flat. I have sewn all 4 of these here. Next, move to the nail surface. This side, it should be in the same position as before. Take a look at its position. Check out this position. Take a visual measurement to match it. This way it can be sewn properly. It fits together. It is correct only when covered. This way. This is really small. It's slightly off. Now pull it up a little. It's really hard. This top part is the thickest because it has several layers. A room combined with a noodle shop has multiple layers, so be extra careful when sewing. Be extra careful when sewing. Then, from the front view, the waist knot is here. Don't press on this waist knot, it's meant to fall down. The inner part is the same as the outer part. So looking at it, it closely follows this line. If you look at this side, the main focus is here. Is it aligned with the waistline? Then we start sewing from here. It's not bad. There are no knots tied in advance, so let's do it this way. Then come back around, just like sewing clothes, and backstitch one stitch. This button is sewn perfectly. When buttoned, it lies very flat. For the third button, we can't position it using the waistline like the others, so we just flatten it. Then align the waistline and the bottom. After flattening, find this button and locate a parallel point with it. This line is parallel, so the center of your button should be on this line. Then, you should sew the edge of the button close to the edge of the garment. This is crucial because if it's misaligned even slightly, will this garment look good? Since no knot was tied beforehand, start by making a few stitches, adding a few more at this spot. Be careful, as buttons can easily snag the thread. When I start filming this, my hand sewing becomes even more challenging and my hand becomes less agile. Then make a stitch back, because as long as you make enough stitches with the hand needle, you don't need to tie a knot. I've tried many times, and it works as long as the thread breaks. Make another stitch in case it falls off. It just happens to be right on this center line. Then you can sew the buttons below normally, just like before, without filming the bottom. And the method for locating the button points is the same. This way it is aligned, the thread isn't aligned, so draw a line to mark it. The buttons on this garment are finished for now. I'll talk about the beads later. The final step is to attach the beads. I initially intended to sew the beads on while it was flat and before attaching it to the garment. However, I was concerned that the position would shift after wearing it, as the beads cannot always remain perfectly centered. Therefore, I will attach the beads after the garment is completed and worn. We can find a good spot ourselves so you can see where it looks best. It can only find a center point. There is one in the middle. Then you firmly pin it yourself. Decide how big it should be. It should probably look like this. Thank you for watching. This can be glued. Sometimes I use glue for those beads when I don't want to use a needle, as I am very afraid of needles. This is actually glued, but you can sew it by hand, though it takes a bit of time to do each stitch. Just fix the position just like how you sew on a button, or you can use a glue stick to attach it. This piece of clothing is done, and I won't be adding beads. I'll just find the right position to attach it. Making this skirt petticoat. The top part is made of cotton fabric. This is a shoe-patterned fabric for the skirt's waist. There are a total of 2 layers. There's another layer underneath to prevent it from being see-through, and you can spray some finishing treatment. Now we are cutting the waistband of the skirt. One is the outer waistband, and the other is the inner waistband. Then this is the mesh, and the mesh should be cut according to the dimensions specified above. This has been cut. Then this wider one is the outer waistband, and this narrower one is the inner waistband. Then cut the mesh fabric according to this fish point. It will be straight, and there's no need to measure it with a ruler. Then determine its width, based on the dimensions written on the sample. Then check the approximate position of that point, and cut according to it. This will ensure it is straight. This piece I've cut has a narrow inner layer, while the outer layer is wide. This lace has a layer on the outer side, and you can add another layer of lace according to your mood, based on the style requirements of the time. This is the lace for the baseboard, which is just glued on top, and you only need to press the seam. Then I'll create this style with lace, making it a complete design. There is a type of petticoat that doesn't require lace, that vintage ant style, because the outer layer of mesh is quite transparent. So we're now focusing on the lace on the outer layer. The inner layer has none. Once the lace is finished, the outer skirt tie needs to be neatly adjusted, similar to how a face looks. It's like a part of the face exposed like this. Inside, the waist is narrow and the hem is narrow too. When you pull your hand away, it can easily get stuck suddenly due to the single layer, so you should go a bit slower, or you can use a hand needle as well. I sewed this by hand. Sometimes when using a sewing machine, it can pile up, so it ended up pulling itself automatically. The result is that it can only produce single lines. But with this type of hand sewing, you can create double stitching. You just sew 2 lines. At this point, sew 1 line and then sew another line in the space between. Once it's finished, you can pull on this section. Pull it to match the length of this waistband and then join it together. You can tie a knot here and a tight knot here. Then adjust it from this side. Adjust its length. The pleat allowance on both sides should be smaller. It's about 1.5 units apart with no pleats. It's flat. This is also the case because during stitching, there shouldn't be too much gathering in the back center. About this long, then you can tie a knot here to secure it. After adjusting the length, adjust the gathering. There's less gathering done here. This spacing is flat. From the back center to here, leave about 1 centimeter, approximately 1.5. Then adjust this pleat to make it uniform. After adjusting the pleat amount, you can sew them together. It also involves a 0.5 seam. Do not leave pleats at both sides. This seam is done, set it aside, and let's work on the waist. The waist consists of this narrow strip. Then, the twill side is the front. Then the folds inside the folds are flat. The twill side is the front. This is also like the previous waist area, not the outer skirt above. It's the same. After gathering the pleats, it's connected to this piece. You can also use a hand needle. Find a recognizable point that is easy to stitch. Use it as a standard. Just follow this seam. It can maintain parallel. The mesh is too large. Household sewing machines, such as this plastic one, it can easily get stuck while sewing and suddenly stop. So hand sewing may start slowly, but it is still smoother than using a sewing machine. If it were double layered, it wouldn't be a problem, but it becomes too bulky. The standard seam allowance is 0.5, but you can make it wider. I've set it to 0.7. It wasn't done according to that seam, but based on this point. Don't go over 0.7. If it's too big, the hem will be shorter after sewing. This is the same as the last one. It's the same as it. Draw to the same length, then sew it together like this. All right, this is what I just finished tying up, and I haven't adjusted it yet. After adjusting it, then connect it with that. This adjustment is even, and the fold amounts on both sides remain uneven. I just finished tying off this sewing machine, and it hasn't been adjusted yet. Once it's properly adjusted, I'll piece it together. It hasn't flattened. Then sew it this way. After this seam is completed, place it here and lay it flat like this. Then turn this over like this, and its seam allowance here. This joint seam here with the piece above it sewn together. Then this is its second layer. Once sewn, it looks like this. Inside looks like this. Then lift it open. Let's press this with a clear line. Press a 0.1 clear line. It's meant to secure it. Press it onto this line. Flip it over after this layer of clear line is properly pressed. You can also press another line on the first layer. It's also fine not to press. The one I made earlier didn't have a line pressed. It's still all right. After this line is properly pressed, next to the waist here, fold back the 0.5 seam allowance, then press a 0.1 top stitch to secure it. Once this is done, sew the back center seam. This fabric has a lot. There are multiple layers, so be careful when sewing. You must align them, or you can first iron a line on them. Secure them, and then you can sew them together. Actually, it can be done in one go. Like this, let's go with a seam allowance of 0.7. If it's too small, it might get missed later. If the seam allowance is too large, it can be trimmed a bit. Trim it a little smaller. This seam allowance. Aren't we supposed to roll a hole for you to wear? Like this, we need to set the seam allowance aside. Usually, if this needle can go through, then you can separate it. This way is also fine, but sometimes the needle gets stuck here when passing through this hole. The seam allowance can also be folded this way. It's just a bit thick, but it won't be very noticeable. Just flip it over like this. Then align this edge with the seam, close to it but not too long. If it's too long, it will affect the swinging effect. It can only go here. It cannot go any lower. Then while sewing, this is where you start sewing. Then the hole is left at this spot. Do not leave it here. Leave a hole here. Then at the right time, pass through here. Just right, this seam goes through easily. Then during the stitching process, we start from here, then go around and stop here. Just sew it well. When sewing, start from here, then go around and sew to here. Did not leave this hole right here. Stay at its edge, then wait until you wear it. Just use the back of the needle. Go in from here. This seam is blocked as it faces this direction, so it won't obstruct this needle. Sew it this way to create a loop. Then you can wear it this way. Fold it back, and then use the thread to sew. Sew it up with this needle and thread. Ensure it goes in smoothly. It's fine to leave the thread a bit longer. Then just make a loop like this. You need to place your hand from behind. Come out from this hole. After the holes are created, don't cut them just yet. Place it on the waist of the little cloth. Put it on the waist of that doll. Check if it has been cut. Take a look at what size is appropriate for you. Then decide how much to leave. Then use a hand needle to seal this opening. That's all you need to do. Typically, you can figure it out by hand. That's about right. It should probably fit around the hip circumference. You can see for yourself. Then tie a knot here. Make this knot tighter. After tying the knot, this excess part can be cut off. Then leave this gap, seal it up, just sew a few stitches by hand. The spacing of my line here, wearing this Sony device, the spacing at this middle position, it's approximately 0.7. Perhaps it wasn't clearly communicated while sewing. This is how you look at this line. Then it reaches here. Let me measure it. It's approximately 1.8. It's just that you can see it. Don't go too fast and don't be too narrow. Can fit into this Sony headset. Just let it stretch back and forth freely. But the extent to which it folds back, it must be here. It's just to this seam. If you wear Sony, you wear Sony. If you exceed it, this area will become tight, the hip circumference will become particularly slender, and then this frees up looking quite unappealing. So you must not go beyond this point. This petticoat is ready. Then let's talk about this sock. The sock is made following this line. Fold it back. It's easier to work on it this way. Fold back the top edge by 0.5 centimeters. Then you can knit this sock by hand. It's also the first stitch. Reverse the stitch. Then the stitches should be use a slightly smaller stitch size. Put it aside, then fold it in half. Don't cut it yet, just flip it back. Cutting it is fine too. But you also need to tie a knot. Just follow this thread. Just sew it up. This sock is very simple. Wrap it a few times at the top to secure it. You can also start by cutting it there. But if you're too lazy to tie a knot, you can just sew it together like this. Then fold them in half and sew down like this. Yes, you need to use that kind of stitching. You shouldn't use plain stitches like this. Make a reverse stitch like this. Avoid using plain stitches. Sewing directly with plain stitches will cause it to leak. The results will be much better. Sew around from top to bottom. The sock is ready. Then turn it inside out. You can trim off the seam allowance. Make it slightly smaller, trimming off half. Don't make it too small. It will easily come off. That's it. This sock is ready. Make the other one in the same way. This one is good.